Hi, my name is Jerry Portwood. I'm the digital editorial director for Rolling Stone magazine. And I have a great panel of people here to talk about Wojnarowicz, the film that's now available from Kino Lorber and in virtual cinemas, which you can find out more on Kino Marquee. First, we have the director of the film, Chris McKim. We have Gracie Mansion, who is a art advisor and also was one of the first galleries to open in the East Village and to show David Wojnarowicz's work. We have Carlo McCormick, a critic and curator who's based in New York. And last but not least, Fenton Bailey, who is a producer of the film, but also many people know him for his other documentaries, Mapplethorpe and many others, and also behind the juggernaut RuPaul's Drag Race. So thank you all for joining. Let's start off, I think, Chris, just by talking about it. I mean, first, the elephant in the room, you put a really fascinating title on your documentary. Already you have a name that most people can't pronounce, and then you put words that people don't like to say. So tell us a little bit about David Wojnarowicz and Fuck You, Faggot Fucker.
Well, the title is, it was kind of the first and last title that we came up with. It was something that, like, from very early on, I kind of walked around joking that it was the title. And all of the time that we were, Randy and Fenton and I were trying to figure out a title, I never really brought it up because I didn't think it would fly. And then one day I was like walking out, we were finishing up a meeting and I was walking out and, I was like, well, what about Fuck You, Faggot Fucker? And Fenton went, yes. And Randy went, I don't know. And so by the next day we were kind of settled on that. But it just seemed very true to David's spirit and true to the spirit of the film. And it is easier to say and remember sometimes than Wojnarowicz, so it seems like a perfect title.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I wanted to start with talking to all of you who knew David and experienced him. One of the things that I remember from the movie that will always stay in my head was a quote that actually that is used, and it says, "I'm not gay as I love you, I'm queer as in fuck off." And that seemed like to be the core in some ways of David's persona. And Gracie, you obviously had to deal with that sort of prickly personality and supporting somebody, but at the same time knowing that he wanted to also keep people away. Or how did you deal with that?
Well, I mean, it's true. I had to stand between him and the collectors. He hated, he didn't, as I say in the film, he didn't like rich people very much at all, as a matter of fact. And, also you're right, David was prickly. And I can remember one time saying to him, oh my God, I feel like, you make me feel like I'm walking on eggs. And then he like really blew up at me. What? So yeah, you had to be careful with David. Very sensitive.
Say that again?
He was very sensitive.
Yeah, I think that there is in the movie we get that that sense of the hard and the sensitive, and we see him cry, but we also see him getting really angry. And one of the things I've always wondered is why so many people don't know about him. And obviously, Chris, that's part of the reason I think hopefully this film will teach a whole other generation of people to appreciate him. Is one, his name was hard to say, as we said, and two, people have a hard time loving the angry young man. And when you have the angry young man, I think I was reading Cynthia Carr, and her book said that at one of the gallery openings, somebody said, why can't you be more like Keith Haring and fun? Or, and be nicer like Keith Haring. Carlo, you obviously probably have a sense of that difference. I mean, Keith and Basquiat and all these other
I mean David didn't really actually like Keith, but I did. But I'm actually the one who said in the film about queer as in fuck you. That was me, and I do think one of the things this movie allows is this entry into that early moment of queer culture rising in New York, which was very punk infused. And Keith actually did, Haring belonged to a group, a kind of a mock group called Fags Against Facial Hair, FAFH, like a revolutionary group. And he put up a big this spray painted "Clones Go Home" right at Astor Place as people were walking into the East Village. And I think that's something which is in this film, was the this new sensibility that was not going to look like it was from village people, and it was going to have a lot more attitude and aggression. So David was definitely informed by that, and I think was very much emblematic of that.
And Fenton, I know you worked assiduously on your Mapplethorpe documentary, which I also love. One of the things that comes up in this documentary as well is the appreciation for photography and how it used to not really be considered an art, and then it became, you know, part of the art world in a way. But then we're also dealing with collage. We're dealing with things that were found objects, you know, and just this tension between the mainstream art world and what is considered, you know, stuff that we're going to sell it or look at in a gallery, and what are we going to collect versus, you know, what people started doing. So, what was your take on some of that?
Oh, I think it was really fascinating the way, you know, with Herring and Basket and Warhol, they were all into the commodification, and that was a very part of the whole East Village art explosion. It felt like this was a, you know, a market explosion that was happening, and David seemed to just completely stand outside of that. And it was interesting as we did the rounds trying to raise money to make the film. I mean, what you said about the angry young man, it was like there were no takers, so we were like, fuck, what are we going to do? And I think at that point we sort of decided we should just make this film ourselves, you know, finance it ourselves. And in a way that felt very fitting because David was so fiercely independent. And I think Chris has made such a fiercely independent film that is so true to the, you know, to David's spirit, which stood aside, I think. I mean, Carlo, you're completely right. This was that time in the East Village was this sort of explosion of queer culture. And yet there were two sort of strands to it. There was the sort of, not the get rich quick, but uptown was coming downtown, right? And there was this sort of real opportunity in that sense, in that sort of Pet Shop Boys sense. Mm-hmm. And then there was David and Peter Hujar, who were completely against all that, you know, and almost truly authentically punk, I suppose.
Yeah, Chris, I have to say, one thing I love about this movie is, you know, we're living in this time of documentaries where it seems like there's so many. There's like, it's like every other day there's a new documentary, or what people call a documentary. But this has such a feeling of the moment and of the art. I mean, first of all, the footage is incredible. Like, you know, the things that we're seeing, the way you've actually made a collage in a lot of ways. How, at first, I don't know how in the world you organized this project, because it just feels so distinctive and so personal, and you just, you know, you kind of get mesmerized by the images and the narration and all of the things you've pieced together. Can you explain like what was going on in your head?
Yeah, well, you know, it really all started with David's audio. You know, I got, you know, there were dozens of audio cassettes, a mixture of the tape journals and band rehearsals, conversations he had with friends, and just like things he'd tape off of television. And, you know, I first just loaded up my iPod or my iPhone, and would walk around and listen to them. I mean, I would sit at the Avid and pull selects and stuff, but it was really like all of these, you know, all of these sounds swimming in my head, in no particular order. I didn't really try to listen to them chronologically or anything. And, you know, so it really all came out of listening to David and sort of first piecing together his story and then filling people in around that and then laying in the images. So it really probably looks more chaotic than it was. And, you know, the editor, Dave Stanky, who I'd worked with before on Out of Iraq, has such a great sort of editing style and is able to push things out there to like the nth degree and still have it, you know, mean something and have emotion and make sense, and tell a story. And so it's, you know, it really just sort of flowed from that. It was kind of like this structured serendipity. And anytime we got into you know, a corner and didn't know how to get to the next thing, we could either just throw in an answering machine tape, because that was a nice reset, or we would just stumble on to like the next piece of David audio, and it was like, oh, well, of course, David has the answer. And that's really how it came together.
I'm curious what you guys all think about the process of his finding or the discovery, let's say. I know that people always hate that because it's like, who discovered who and how? And that moment of the New York Times, Grace Gluck's piece, and then suddenly Uptown descends on downtown. And, you know, there's a bit of that in Mapplethorpe and other people of that time of like, they needed to have somebody explain to the masses or to the rich people, you know, that this was safe or this was acceptable. And I'm constantly going back to that. But Robert Mapplethorpe, on the other hand, really wanted that. And then David didn't. Like it seemed like, as we said, he was keeping it away. So how did that work? I mean, was it just that his work was too good that people couldn't ignore it, Carlo?
No, I mean, I think just to kind of tie it into what Chris was saying, it's so great to hear David speak in this movie, because so many documentaries, when you're talking about the plethora of them, it's just talking heads. It's people like me or Gracie, and, you know, just saying things. And for a visual artist, it's very, you know, it's important to convey the vision. But David's not just that, he's also a writer. So you need to hear his voice. And I think that's really great. And what you get in this voice is a lot more complexity and even contradiction than you do when you let other people speak of them. And you get to hear David's humor, I think, a bit in this. It's a dark humor. Maybe some people won't think it's funny, but it's there. And then what I think is in there is a sense of pain within the anger. And we're used to righteous rage, but to have that nuance of vulnerability built into it. So to answer what you're saying, I just say that we were all pretty ambivalent about success. And it was a love-hate relationship. So David was not without desires that way, but like most of us, when you gave him ammunition, he just shot himself in the foot.
It's funny what you say about his voice, because I said early on, and this is a confession, I said to Chris, we have to do something about David's voice. It's so sort of, you know, intense and sort of, I use the word monotonous, and I'm ashamed to say that, but I really came to love the voice and feel it's one of the unique parts of the film. It's like this blunt instrument, and it's so lovely. But Chris, do you remember me saying, what are we gonna do?
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I was like, I don't know. That's our star. What are we gonna do?
David was very uncomfortable doing live readings, and it was really great to hear him speak without a lot of the shyness or whatever, the stutter that could descend upon him. But when he first started reading Sounds in the Distance and stuff like that, and it just made it all more intense when he was talking, to have a little bit of the stammer in there, like he was spitting it out.
Gracie, what do you feel about this? Well, the discovery, whatever we're talking about.
Well, I mean, I think Carlo brought it up a little bit, but you know, when Grace Gluck came down, before that was like the start of something in the East Village. Up till that point, I mean, we were all just hanging out and doing these shows, and it was all of our friends, and it was like a clubhouse. We had girls' night with and it was the critics and the curators and the dealers and the artists that would all get together. I mean, there was the East Village Orchestra. You remember that, Carlo, right?
Yeah.
A gigantic, that Keiko and Mark put together, a gigantic group that performed at a couple places. So it wasn't really about, maybe now it looks like it, but it wasn't at all about making money. That was kind of a surprise.
No, I mean, that comes through. I mean, to me, one of the messages at the heart of it is it was a time before it felt like capitalism was triumphant. And now that we've lost that battle, it's all about capitalism. And there was this battle going on. Chris, was that in your head at all? I mean, there is a resistance. at the heart of this of this film.
Well, I mean, that just comes from David. I mean, it's all resistance and disruption. And, you know, we certainly, you know, cover the sort of birth of that East Village scene, but for me, it was always very, you know, what David's path was through it more than, you know, I think anything else. And he certainly, you know, was eloquent about what his problems were, and, you know, and talking with Peter about them as well. And it was interesting to be able to hear them speak about the art scene and what they, you know, and what they thought about other, you know, some of it didn't end up in there, but like what they thought about other artists on the scene and stuff like that was, you know, pretty interesting.
I mean, you show the controversy that happened in the, you know, 91. I think it's 91, right? With
89, 90, with the art space.
Yeah, and then
art space.
And then with the Jesse Helms and the other things that happened.
Wildman. Yeah.
Yeah, but then we know that even recently, in the last 10 years, we've had that his work is still sparking controversy. And you know, the image of the crucifix with the ants on it that was cut down in hide and seek, and the Smithsonian having all of the things. I mean, is it just radical to you that his art can still spark so much anger or fear or emotions?
You know, it's hard for me to talk. I know what you're talking about, the Smithsonian thing, but with that, it was much like what we did with the film. They took audio from David's archive and placed it over, you know, underneath that image, and that kind of sparked the debate. Whereas in the film, you know, we show the ants, but it's as David intended, and it's actually much more inflammatory than what was in the, you know, Smithsonian. And it, you know, it's hard to speak about what set them off at the time, you know, about that. But certainly, I mean, I think, you know, David spoke from his heart, and it was a very dark time that somehow still speaks to exactly what's happening in our lives now. And I think, you know, that's frightening to the powers that be, and the, you know, the people that he was speaking out against, in the, you know, parts of society that he was speaking out against.
Yeah, the piece that they named it "Fire in the Belly," I think, is the one that they recut, but the original was "Silence equals death," right?
Well, I mean, David, it popped up in numerous things, like all of Dave, you know, whether it's the writing, various images, themes like the sewn mouth. It's like he would reuse this stuff many different times, so it would end up in It's So FOMO, and it was so, you know, the fire, I can't think of the name of it. You just said it. But that was, yeah, Fire in the Belly was an unfinished film that, you know, that he hadn't finished. And I think they were trying to, or various people have tried to kind of piece it together from notes and stuff. But, you know, it didn't exist in any sort of like, even informal way that I found in the archives.
I think what's nice as well, and hopefully people who are just discovering him now for the first time in the 21st century, is many people associate him with the AIDS marches, the movements, his funeral. But you do such a good job, as Carlo mentioned, of showing that punk scene, and that there was a whole, you know, identity before people identified him with AIDS and the resistance and ACT UP and things like that. And that was beautiful. I thought that we get to see, you know, this whole punk side of everything, especially because people don't always think of that in a gay man, right? This sort of rebelliousness like that.
Well, then they're missing half the population of homosexuality in America if they're missing that.
Yeah.
You know.
Tell us a little bit about the music and the band.
Well, the band, Three Teens Kill Four, this is actually December would have been their 40th anniversary from that first time they played after Danceteria was shut down. And you know, it was great. Well, it was great to have the band members to be able to speak about that, you know, because they as many collaborators as David had, that was a very like sort of intimate collaboration at a time, you know, before he had really discovered himself or had spent much time in the art, you know, in the art world. And it's interesting to see how many things that they did in the lyrics and sort of their ideas kind of played out throughout, you know, both his work, but also continue to speak to what's going on now, you know, whether it's, you know, politicians and the lies and everything else. And, you know, in the film, Jesse Hopper describes their sound as a cacophonic barrage. And that really early on sort of became a guiding principle for the sound, because we always wanted to sort of create this sort of like sound bath and this sound bed, knowing that, you know, we were starting from the audio and working up. It was just always very important. And so that idea of disruption and bringing in all these sounds that David had recorded, you know, from you know, everything from shortwave radio in France in the 70s to, you know, the Reagan assassination, and just kind of sprinkling those things throughout. So the band's sound really sort of, in addition to using their music, really kind of helped form the you know, the sound of the film overall.
Yeah, I love that band. I saw them so many times. As a matter of fact, I met David through Brian Butterick, who was a bandmate of his, and you have Brian in the movie. May rest in peace. He died since then. But what David does with that tape player is just amazing. It's sort of like a weird bridge between the you know, avant-garde sound loop work of like a Steve Reich early on, and then sample culture, which is right coming up then. And so it's really like amazing to think about what he was doing with a tape player as an instrument, and now how ubiquitous that is in most studio production.
So one thing you might have set up though is this, you know, relationship between Peter Hujar and David. So now we're going to need another Peter Hujar documentary, or tell his story as well, right? What do you guys think?
Absolutely.
I think that's in the works. Maybe I think somebody's doing that.
Yeah, I think Chris, I think it's a scripted film. You know, the guys who did Lovelace and The Celluloid Closet, I'm blanking on their names now, which is really embarrassing. But I think they're doing it because they reached out saying, "Can we see the film?" And I was like, "We just have to wait till it's released." So,
can you guys? I mean, you obviously do such a great job in the movie, but is there any more that you guys would like to share about that relationship? And those audio recordings from Peter are so adorable and weird and just so intimate. And it's just so nice to hear those kinds of like private messages and moments.
Well, just to say that David kept everybody really compartmentalized in his life. And so to see all the different people and to see all the aspects of his life in this one film, it's like you're seeing the total David. For instance, I never met Tom Rothenbard. I never met Anita. I mean, when Anita talked at you know, the memorial, I'm like, who's this person? You know, it was kind of shocking that David had one-on-ones with almost everybody.
Yes, Cindy Carr also does a great job in her book, C. Carr's book, kind of pulling all these things together, because David really did keep things pretty sorted in his life.
Chris, were you gonna mention anything?
Oh, I was just going to say, you know, another case where I mean, the answering machine tapes are one of my favorite things to just like spend hours listening to, but like to hear Peter in that, especially coming from, you know, having never known him and not knowing that we'd have the ability to kind of bring him to life, you know, through just those little snippets of jokes and, you know, sort of back and forth that way. It's like, it was sort of a rare blessing to be able to do that, because I feel like so much comes out of them, so much personality and so much caring between them, you know, and it's like, it is one of those things. It's like, I don't think people would think of the, David Wojnarowicz documentary as necessarily being like lighthearted. People who knew him knew he had a sense of humor, but to hear these little glimpses of his relationships with different people like Peter, and how special they were when, people who aren't of that time just know the angry young man. And the same thing with Pat, his sister. She's one of the most disruptive things in the film. Every time David's in the middle of screaming, it's like, hey, David, it's Pat, and it's like, it just pierces through that. And again, she's only available through the answering machine stuff as well.
I had no idea that David kept Carlo, did you know that David kept tapes of everything?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, I think we have this very, it's a great benefit for the film and for people who want to do scholarship and stuff, but David's a natural archivist slash pack rat. And it's the message tapes, the dream diaries. There's Marvin Taylor, who's the director of Fales Library, which is a special archive collection within NYU. He's got David's archives, and there's this little magic box, as he calls it, which was all the stuff David would keep, like little toys and things like that, which would reappear in his art and stuff like that. But it was like a little alchemical treasure trove. And I don't want to overread into it, but I think it resonates with the fact that he had a lot of uncertainty and anxiety and kind of itinerancy as a kid. So this way that he held on to things and treasured them, and maybe not fetishize them, but like that he kept those tapes and stuff like that. That was very David to me.
Yeah, it reminded me of the stories of Warhol doing similar, taping everything, keeping it, putting it in boxes, archiving it, and that being part of the art. It is connected to collage, I assume, in that way, or just that time period of appropriation in a positive way, right? We talk about appropriation now in a sort of negative way, but that period, appropriation was actually quite a new thing. I love the scene with the Xerox machine, for example, because young people don't remember how exciting that was, this ability, and being able to do that. That's those moments that I hope it also just shines a light on an era. We talk about people being woke now, but this is like, how woke can you get with this sort of thing?
I love when Jean-Michel made enough money that he could buy his own Xerox machine, and how we all were, all the artists got so mad at him. Just like, he can do his own Xeroxes.
Yeah, it's so funny you mention that, because I remember in East Village going to Jamie Canvas down in Soho and using the color Xerox machine. And Joe Andrus, who was in Dance Noise, she used to work there, and she'd look the other way so I could make all the color Xeroxes I wanted to. And it's the answering machine and Xeroxes. These are like such sort of nostalgic mediums.
That's how Kim Gordon worked at Todd's Copy Shop, and Thurston used to go there to print his zine. So that's how Sonic Youth forms, is at a copy shop.
Yeah, there was a sort of I don't want to get hyper nostalgic about it, but this sense of also just a proliferation of creation, and not, as you guys have said, not about making a career or money. It was just like, I need to do this, and there's a way to do it, and it doesn't matter if it gets me famous or rich or anything. It's just, you needed to do it. And Gracie, you kind of mentioned that as well. Like, the gallery wasn't about, obviously it's nice to sell things and make money, but it was just about showing, right, and having that experience.
Sharing, a lot about sharing.
Yeah. In that way, I feel like the documentary does feel very generous, right? It doesn't look like a selfish type of scene. He feels very generous in his way. I don't know. Is there anything that?
Well, can I ask a question?
You may.
Yeah, it's kind of for you, Chris, just about the odd synchronicity that really you're dealing at a point where disease becomes a kind of disease with AIDS, and the kind of the dread that came with that, and that we're going through a pestilence, a pandemic now. Did you think about that at all, or was that fortuitous? Did that affect the way you thought of the film?
We locked the film February 2020. So it was because we were, supposed to premiere at Tribeca. And so we were racing. I was actually finishing 2 films that were supposed to be in Tribeca. So we locked that. I went to New Orleans to do some filming with Charles Blow and Frida, came back and we did the mix. So the last day of, my life in polite society was March 13th. Friday the 13th. And that was the week that we had mixed it. So it was done. I mean, we still had to like online it, but there was no going back and changing anything because it had already been mixed. And, the fact that the pandemic happened and then of course, the election and the riot, the Black Lives Matter protests and, the Capitol, as all this stuff was happening, I was slowly losing my mind the whole year because I really wanted the film to come out before the election because it seemed important. That was the guidance. Part of the reason I wanted to make the movie was because I was losing my mind, in the summer of 2017 when I reached out to PPOW, was really the start of it. And so it all, David knew. That's all I can say. I mean, he was so on top of it. He was a year ahead of what we were going through in 2020. And right down to if I were a violent person, I'd go into the Capitol and take out, and it's like, well, shit, that was a long time ago. I mean, he said a long time ago and we cut it in a long time ago. So as disappointed as I was that it wasn't coming out before the election, well, of course, everything's still a shit show. So it doesn't matter. It's still perfectly timed because all these, the fascists are still half in power and out to get more. So,
it was quite chilling hearing his voice talking about that after, I think I first saw it before the Capitol riot, and then I've recently, rewatched it after the Capitol riot. And so hearing that, it's like, oh, this is prescient and scary. There's a lot of scary moments in this movie. That's not a question, but but it's also a sexy movie. I have to say, also having recently watched Fran Lebowitz and Martin Scorsese's docuseries, you think that she's an asexual person, and then suddenly, whoa, we're getting Fran, the sexy Fran, and I was like, what? This is new. So tell us a little bit about the Fran stuff.
Oh my God, well, Fran was amazing. I got to spend an hour at the Maritime with Fran. And, from the moment I met her in the lobby all the way up the stairs in the elevator till I had her mic'd and sat her in the chair, she was on topic, telling me everything I would ever want to know about David and Peter. And, Peter taking her to the clubs and taking her to the piers and taking her to the trucks. There's much more sexy Fran to come from the Wojnarowicz interview tapes. But, it's interesting because she really does. I mean, it's all of these people, great. Before we started this, Gracie said something and laughed. And it's like that laugh is so burned into my mind because there are so many moments in the film where it's just Gracie's little laugh, it's like laughing at something that David did. And it's the same with, Fran and just the way she cuts through whatever we might be talking about, whether it's the AIDS crisis or, Peter and David, and maybe, oh, there was some trick, Peter had, and I didn't know who he was, and I thought he was a teenager because he had this band. It's just like, it helped bring moments of levity that made it even more fun to make,
And you don't make a huge deal out of it, but we do see these moments of the meatpacking when it was actually the meatpacking district, and it was quite a different scene. And then we have the big retrospective at the Whitney that's now in that area, which is all cleaned up and pretty and polished. Can you talk a little bit about the ending and why you decided to go that direction to wrap things up?
When we filmed, that was actually the first thing I filmed was Tom's interview. And then that week of the Whitney retrospective, which was July 2018, I think, was really the first big sort of push of, I did interviews with the people coming into town for the show and stuff. And I initially thought it might bookend the film, like sort of be a wraparound, but it just, it just made sense to kind of button things up and to give a sense of some little glimpse of where David's work is now or how it's being received. You mentioned earlier the sort of the thing with the Smithsonian, and I think it was like 2011, I could be wrong. But we do, when David passes away, it's like, well, the whole film has come from him. He's a third, he's a third of the film. And so it really, it didn't feel right to really cover too much beyond that. There isn't much in the film that he doesn't speak on. The art, when they were doing the art at the piers, and a couple other moments where he was just so busy at that period in his life that he wasn't recording the journals. But it just didn't feel natural or organic to kind of stick around or have much more to say. But of course, the Whitney retrospective was such a good button, and it's to be able to get him to say one last thing in there too was, important. And that was, of course, the first time I really started to, I had met Tom and Anita and Wendy and Penny, of course, from PPOW, but it was my first opportunity to kind of, to meet the family, the extended Wojnarowicz family, all these people, Marion and Three Teens Kill, and all these people who had been so important in David's life and to David and in their lives. And it was a really special thing to sort of witness. And I think that just sort of fed into my feelings of putting it in the end as well.
Well, I wanted to just say, like, Fenton, you've obviously been behind so many queer stories being told, and this is the next one. There's so many more that we want to tell. Is there anything else you guys are hoping? We mentioned a couple, but is there other stories that you just feel like people need to learn about? I feel like there's so much education we need to put out there.
No, I think it seems to me there's such a fascination now with the East Village in that period. And I think it's sort of originally, it was more in the Patti Smith era, like early 70s. And now it seems to be drifting later into the 80s. So I'm excited to see, what stories come up and get told, because it was such an extraordinary time. I mean, Carlo and Gracie living there, I don't know that at the time any of us necessarily had any feeling that we were living in an extraordinary time. It only sort of becomes apparent in retrospect, but it really was quite remarkable. And maybe it was because it was pre-internet or something, but there was this, Grace, you said it was about sharing, and there was this sort of extended family sense. It wasn't that everybody was braiding each other's hair, but everybody sort of knew each other. And I often think about Nelson Sullivan, who would videotape every event and be omnipresent with his camera. One of the first films we made was about Nelson, and his archive is now it's the Fails.
Yeah, it's also where David's is.
Yeah, and I feel there's more to be done there. But it was an amazing time,
Yeah, I have to say, I can remember saying to somebody during that time, "Oh, I wish I would have lived in Paris between the wars." And they said, "You are." But only recently, Sir Rodney Sir said something to me that I never realized. He said he felt that the East Village came to an end because of AIDS. He said that when collectors didn't want to come down to the East Village anymore because they saw it as a danger or whatever, and when they would come into the gallery and he would walk up to them, they would back up.
I'm glad you think that now, Gracie, because you used to blame me for writing that East Village RIP story. But
I still blame you for that.
Yeah, so we did do that in the local paper, East Village Rest in Peace. And it was pretty much at that moment, you call it the Grace Gluck moment, but there's this whole moment, and I think this is inherent in any scene you look at historically, is a second that there's an our audience instead of all participants. The second there's money going in, the second some people are getting successful and other people aren't, the scene's over. So when the East Village starts for many people, for some of us, it was over. And you can talk, you know, people will tell you how the 60s ended at Woodstock, when for a lot of people it begins. Or you can do this, you know, what, how bad is it by the time it gets to School of Paris later on. So everything is, has that very short lifespan, but I was very conscious of how special it was at the time. You know, it wasn't wasted on me. I was wasted, but it wasn't wasted on me.
Well, guys, I think you told us a lot of great. I mean, I thought there was already so much in the movie, but now I know so much more. So I think this has been great, and hopefully everyone will take their time and watch and rewatch Wojnarowicz. It's you know, now available nationwide, and on virtual you can stream it at Kino Marquee. Is there any closing comments? Anything you want to share as we wrap things up?
Thank you.
Bravo.
Thank
you.
Bravo to you, Chris.
Yeah, congrats, Chris.
For doing it. It's
Yeah,
fantastic.
it really felt like a labor.
Try,
of love.
but it's fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for being in. Thank you for all of your help, and to all the people who, you know, it's one of my regrets, and we were talking about like that extended David family, and there are so many people he worked with, both that I talked to and wasn't able to talk to, but you know, because so much of David is in the film, it really meant that a lot of people could not be, and I still, you know, I feel bad about that, but what can you do? There's a time limit. Maybe there'll be another film someday. But you know, David touched a lot of people's lives, and you know, for me, I think he's a real queer hero. He's a real, you know, somebody that upcoming generations should look up to, and hopefully this will introduce him to them.
Absolutely.